When 3 teens were found murdered in close proximity over the space of 3 days in March and April of 2023, the local community of Ocklawaha, Marion County, Florida, thought that their town, with a population of just 1,500 people, would be home to America's next serial killer. All the characteristics were there, similar victim profiles, and the bodies were found, as you know, over the course of a few days. However, ladies and gentlemen, to set the record straight, just like the sheriff did in the early stages of the investigation, this wasn't the work of a serial killer. But believe me when I tell you this, when you see the circumstances surrounding the case, it will chill many of you to your core. 10:48 p.m. Thursday, March 30th, 2023. Marion County Sheriff's deputies are called to Southeast 183rd Avenue Road in the Forest Lakes Park area to reports that 4 or 5 gunshots went off outside of a residential property, followed by a car hitting a dumpster. Upon arrival, police were met with a concerned resident who would further explain that the car in question, a white sedan, had fled the area after a male had jumped in the driver's seat. What the concerned resident didn't know, however, was the fact that a 16-year-old girl was fighting for her life just yards from where she was standing by that dumpster. The girl, later identified as Layla Silvernail, was discovered by police just moments after speaking with the witness. Again, she was found in a pool of her own blood after being shot in the head, but believe it or not, she still had a pulse. She would soon be taken to a local hospital and received urgent surgery before eventually being put on life support. But when news emerged that Layla would be brain dead moving forward, the decision was made to switch the life support machine off. At around 8 a.m. the following day, March 31st, 2023, Marion County Sheriff's deputies responded to reports that a male had been found dead on Southeast 94th Street and Southeast 188th Court by some children who had been walking to school. When deputies arrived at the scene, that's exactly what they were met with. The boy, currently unnamed in the media, but is believed to be around 17 years old, had been found with gunshot wounds laying in a ditch by the side of the road. I was walking to the bus stop to go to school with my brother and I found the guy. He wasn't breathing. He was laying on his side and was wearing a black hoodie, black shirt, black pants and black shoes. He had the hoodie over his head and he had a black mask over his face. I couldn't see his face. You could only see his eyes. There were no obvious signs of bullet wounds that I could see. It's sad and I was scared. My brother called the police and spoke to them. At that time, it was unclear if police had connected the dots and married the two events, but from the outside looking in, it looked as if a crazed murderer was on the loose. Some didn't want to believe it, but maybe, just maybe, a serial killer was on the hunt for young teens. A day later, those fears would only grow. At around 12:40 p.m. on Saturday, April 1st, police made their way to a lake in the area of Melaleuca Loop, a Melaleuca Loop trace, a rough 10-mile drive from where the body of the 17-year-old male victim was found. When they arrived, there it was, the car that had been linked to the first shooting. That car, believe it or not, was owned by none other than Layla Silvernail, the first victim. Police had received intel from a member of the public about the vehicle and wanted to trace it in relation to that first shooting. So when they found it partially submerged in the lake, it was clear someone was trying to hide evidence. You won't believe what officers found upon a further search of the vehicle. That's right, another body. 16-year-old Camille Quarles was discovered by police in the trunk of the car. She'd been shot dead before the car was pushed into the water. Over the next few days, police began to connect the dots. After conducting further inquiries, they figured out all 3 victims had been friends, and so the cases had to be connected.
Last Thursday night, my office responded to the area of Forest Lakes Park. When they arrived, they located a female lying beside the road suffering from a gunshot wound. The victim was transported to the hospital in critical condition and was later identified as a 16-year-old girl, whose name I'm not going to repeat on here. Now, following morning, deputies responded to Southeast 94th Street and Southeast 188th Court, in reference to a 17-year-old male lying beside the road. He was found to be deceased from a gunshot wound. Then on Saturday, more of my deputies responded to the area of Malacca Loop and Malacca Loop Trace in reference to information that led us to the victim's vehicle that was partially submerged at the edge of a nearby body of water. Now, the members of my major crimes unit, forensic unit, and underwater team responded, collected evidence, recovered the vehicle. After going through the vehicle, we found a third victim within the vehicle. 16-year-old female, who also had a gunshot wound and was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, I'm here to assure that small-knit community the major crimes detectives are working very hard to determine who was the individual that committed this heinous crimes. Now, we're looking for help. We're looking for help for the families who have lost a loved one. And there are folks out there that know. You got information. Now, one of the things I want to start with is I want to stop the rumors that are on social media. One of the rumors is that there's a fourth victim. As of right now, there is not. Nor do we have any information to indicate that we do. Unless you know something that we don't. And that means you're not helping us. If you do know more, you need to call us. Give us that information. Now, the second rumor I want to address is the idea that there is a serial killer out there. That is far from the truth. Now, I have the facts of what we know right now. And I can give you that assurance. So do not speculate on social media. Because one of the things I want each of you to think of and try to remember when you start to type is that there are family members out there reading it. And some of you make it up. And it's devastating to that family. And you need to stop. But however, you can help us. You can provide us this information. Call us. Now, there's things that we cannot tell you, can't tell the media. Some things we can't even tell the family members. One, because the law does not allow us to do it. Marcy's law. And then two, the integrity of the case itself, to ensure that we can build a solid case against this individual that committed these crimes.
Many in the media began to wrongly label the case the work of a serial killer. The sheriff's department would quickly shut down those reports, stating that the evidence pointed towards all victims being shot within the car before their bodies had been dumped across the town. This wasn't the work of a serial killer, rather, gang activity. Over the course of the rough week-long investigation, police had 3 suspects they were chasing. 17-year-old Robert Robinson, aka Reaper, 16-year-old Taj Bruton, and 12-year-old Christopher Atkins, aka 3-5. Evidence from one of the victims' phones showed the suspects and at least one of the victims toting firearms, which suggested that this victim had been a part of the gang. Although there were no photographs of the other 2 victims, police say they were connected to the gang in some way, but to what extent wasn't specifically given.
Ties. This is how it goes. Like, what is it? Camera. straight. Just the way it is, man. Yeah, that's not what I just ended on. That's not what it is. It's going to the news. News and shit, man.
Robert had been in jail at the time police were hunting for him, as he had been involved in a separate armed robbery case, and so they already had at least one of their suspects in custody. Soon after, Christopher would be tracked down to his home address, whilst Taj fled and went on the run. When Robert and Christopher were brought in for questioning, they would go on to tell police exactly what happened. According to their police statements, they had initially been with the three victims, not Taj, on March 30th, where they smoked drugs, committed burglaries, and robbed cars. And at around 6:30 p.m, the group would go on to set up a robbery via Snapchat. From what we know of that robbery, it's that an unidentified male agreed to buy a firearm from one of the people in the group. When the unidentified male would meet up with them, he got into Layla's car and he produced $240 in cash for said firearm. And as he did so, both Robert and Christopher robbed him at gunpoint after smacking him with their guns. The robbery victim managed to run from the scene. As he did so, one of the pair fired a shot, narrowly missing him. Next on the agenda was a planned robbery of a weed dealer, and so the five picked up Taj Bruton for extra manpower. All six were now present in the car, and so you've got an understanding of how the car was laid out. You had the eventual murder victim in the front passenger seat. Layla had been in the driver's seat. The three suspects, Taj, Robert and Christopher, were all in the back, whilst Camille had been in the trunk. She opted to sit there. At some point after picking Taj up, Christopher told investigators that Robert, out of nowhere, pulled out a firearm and shot the male sitting in the front, adding Robert forced him to shoot Layla. He said he would kill me and my family if I didn't shoot her. But what about Camille then? Because she was still alive, she was going to snitch on all of us. We was all going to go to jail for life. Robert admitted to investigators that he shot Camille because he feared that he would end up going to jail because she would come forward to police to tell them what happened. Police have admitted they don't at this moment understand why the shots were fired, and days on, that still isn't clear. Either way, both Christopher and Robert would go on to be charged in relation to the triple homicide. What about Taj then? Well, after going on the run for a few days, law enforcement would eventually catch up with him, and he was charged for carjacking with a firearm, aggravated assault, grand theft of a motor vehicle, fleeing or attempting to elude a law enforcement officer, and tampering with an electronic monitoring device. Although he hasn't initially been charged for murder, police say they do expect further charges to emerge as the investigation continues to develop.